Well, good morning, viewers. Today we have a Caravan here, and it's not pretty. It's got a miss. You can see the engine shaking. You can feel it. It's from another shop. They've apparently changed the plugs and coil. You see the check engine light is on steady. It's not flashing. Let's listen to the cadence of a clear flood cranking event. Doesn't sound bad. All right, well, we're going to put the scanner on it and scan it and start with that. So it's auto-detected it as a 2014 Grand Caravan SE. Forgot to change vehicles from the last scan. Should be automatic VIN detection. Yeah, it did. 203,509 kilometers. To me, it sounds like there's a tick in the engine as well. So let's scan it. O2 coolant sensor high. That's probably why the cooling fan's running continuously. Cylinder 5 Misfire, P0606 internal control processor. That's not a good code. O2 sensor circuit. System voltage below level. Stored. Right thorax squib. Stored. Door module. Window not calibrated. Probably had the battery disconnected. Rear temperature door travel too small. I think we're probably close to being done here. Cylinder 5 misfire. The oxygen sensor heater won't cause a misfire, and the coolant temperature won't cause a problem either. I'm watching the voltage, 11.6. I'm going to put a battery charger on it. So I got a clean battery charger on it set at 13.6 volts. Let's confirm which cylinder is misfiring. And we're going to start it. That's interesting. Huh. Maybe I have to exit out of this test and start the test with it running. I can feel it misfiring. So something's disabled the misfire counter. Wonder if the cooling fan problem is causing that, or the let's check the status of the coolant temp sensor. The radiator cooling fan is, see, the coolant temperature sensor voltage is at 5 volts, which is an open circuit. And it might display the calculated, see, it's displaying the calculated coolant temperature. You got to watch that on Chryslers. So normally it would show -40 for an open circuit, but it's calculating the coolant temperature based on other inputs, but this is the one that gives it away, the 5 volts. But that shouldn't disable misfire counting. So you can see it shaking. But there's a kick from the back of the engine. I'm putting the microphone back here to see if we can hear it. Where's the coolant temp sensor on this thing? So I tried to do a injector cutout test, but it won't let me because the engine coolant temperature is below 180 Fahrenheit. I looked for that sensor. It's supposed to be on the back of the left cylinder head and I don't see it. I suppose we could do a relative compression test and current ramp the ignition coils, see if we can see any ignition problem, but I probably am leaning towards a camshaft lobe problem where rocker arm roller follower has failed. And it might not show up in a relative compression test because it's got lots of time during a cranking RPM test to build compression. I'm going to try running it until it gets up to 180 Fahrenheit, or at least it thinks it's at 180 Fahrenheit, while I look for that temp sensor. So I did a relative compression test synced with ignition coil number 1, which is over on the firewall side front of the engine. So this is cylinder number 1, and the firing order is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to try and clean up that current clamp. Maybe I'll try AC coupling or something on it because I've got a filter turned on, but it's still relatively noisy looking and nothing conclusive there. And it doesn't sound bad, but again, during cranking RPM, you got lots of time for the air to get in and out of the cylinder, so you could have normal compression at cranking speeds. Fortunately, the coil in question is accessible without pulling the intake plenum off. That's the coil back there. You can see it's a new coil. So thinking in-cylinder pressure waveform transducer possibly here. So I tried a different amp clamp and it's inconclusive. So this is cylinder number 5 right here. So we're gonna see if we can current ramp the ignition coils. Hopefully I can do it at a fuse in the fuse panel here. I got to look at the wiring diagram. So here's the ignition circuit, and there appears to be one fuse that feeds all of the ignition coils. It also feeds the canister purge. No, feeds the 2 capacitors. So I don't think there's anything else on this circuit. Let's blow this up so we can see which fuse it is. Fuse M21 20 amps in the totally integrated power module. So we'll see if we can locate that. So it's fuse M21. It's the second one here, but I'd normally put this in there, but it won't fit because it interferes with this relay here. I wonder what that relay is for. K7. Way to go, gray text on black background. I gotta figure this out. So that's not good. I gotta set up the scope properly, but we're missing an ignition coil event. So it's conclusive. We got an ignition coil firing event missing. So this is synced with number 1. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 5 ignition coil ramp is not there. 6, and then it repeats. So we either have an open circuit on the coil. I doubt we have a defective coil because it's been replaced. I wonder why it doesn't set an ignition coil driver code like a P0305. Unless it's intentionally shut it down because of a misfire. Let's go back in the recording here and see if it was ever firing. No, I gotta capture it at the beginning. There's the entire recording. I can't remember if they might shut down an ignition coil firing event intentionally because of a misfire. In which case it should fire initially. Oh my goodness sakes. So I captured the cranking event and the initial startup. You can see where it initially fired, and right off the get-go it's missing number 5. You can see every 5th one is missing. So we're gonna pull the wheel off and look at checking continuity of the wires. I doubt it's a coil because it's been replaced for this problem, so it's not likely a coil. I suppose we could check pin fitment. I wonder if I disconnect that coil if it sets with P0351. I'm going to try that because that's easy to do. So in case you're wondering how I current ramped it, I put a jumper wire with a fuse in it in there. I've got number 5 ignition coil unplugged electrically, and we're going to start it and see if it's set a P0355 code. So I'm going to clear the codes. There's no P0355. We're going to clear the codes. That internal PCM error code bothers me, but sometimes that's set by low memory or low voltage. And several of the modules had low voltage. Okay, so we got intake air temperature sensor because I have it unplugged, and the coolant sensor is plugged in, but it's got to be defective. Let's start it and see what happens. The CO2 sensor heater code. This thing's running out of gas. So it's odd that it wouldn't set an ignition coil control code. I'm going to try unplugging in a different ignition coil. So I got number 3 coil unplugged now, and it didn't set a code. Unless the code recording is not live. But it appeared to be because it populated the O2 sensor heater circuit code after the fact. So it's possible this thing isn't capable of monitoring the ignition coil control circuits. I've never seen that before, but nothing surprises me anymore. So we're going to locate the ECM and check continuity of the wires. So there is an inline connector. It's down by the back of the right-hand cylinder head. I think that looks like it down there. This pin 12 at this connector is the ASD feed, and ignition coil number 5 is pin 4. So we could check the wire from there up to the ignition coil. I think this is the connector down here, right in the middle of the screen right now. Nothing easy to get to on this car. So they've obviously been here looking at the wires. Inner fender skirt's off, so that saves me a bit of time. So we're going to identify the 2 pins that go to ignition coil number 5 and check continuity of the wires. So it's pin 74, which is the control side of ignition coil number 5. And we're going to check for power at the ignition coil with the key in the run position. The auto shutdown relay might turn off after a couple of seconds though, so we'll have to confirm that. So I got a 3 amp test light hooked to ignition coil number 3 ASD circuit. And you can see it powers on with the key and then shuts off after about a second. So now I'm going to repeat that test on the ASD wire to number 5. ignition coil. So now I'm number 5 ASD feed. And it powers it up just fine. Let's see if it's cranking. So we got to check continuity of the wire back to the computer to pin 74, I believe it was. So connector 2 is the brown connector. So that's the forward one on the ECM. Interesting, not the one they had untaped. Pin 74 is at the opposite end of the locks. This is a connector view looking into the connector. So this is 74 here, 73, 74. Unfortunately, it's not labeled, but pin 1 is dark blue and green, coil control number 1. So I'll see if I can figure it out. So I screwed up. Pin 74 is the second pin over from 73. Obviously it goes up from there. So I'm back pinning, or I'm face pinning it with a 20 thou probe. There is the second pin in, it's blue and yellow. And continuity testing, I got 0.0 ohms resistance. So the wire is good. The drive circuit has failed in the ECM, in my opinion. Make sure you don't use a probe that's too fat. I use a 20 thou pin. So this thing needs an ECM. I'm going to do a couple more tests before I condemn it, check pin fitment. So I'm using that circuit to supply current to a 3 amp test light, and it loads the circuit just fine and it lights up, so that circuit is fine.